Welcome to episode 11 of AR Chat. As always, I'm joined by my lovely co-hosts, Stephen Dickens and Crystal Golightly. Today we have an awesome episode in store for you as we're joined by Brandon Davis of LogicMonitor. Brandon, hi.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going all right. It's Friday, so there's not much to complain about. So thanks for taking the time to chat.
Broadcast on a Tuesday, so it's not live. It's not live.
I am full of mistakes today, but we're going to leave this in because it's all part of the authenticity. So, Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so first of all, it's great to be here. I've been following this series for a while, and it's a privilege to be here, and seems like I'm in great company. So, thank you for having me on. A little bit about me: I've been doing analyst relations now full time for about 10 years, and that includes my time at Gartner. Don't hate me for that, but I think that's kind of the track a lot of people kind of come into analyst relations on, and spent some time at smaller startups, bigger companies, and then it's kind of all led me to my time here at LogicMonitor, where I'm currently practicing.
And he's doing an amazing job of it. So Brandon and I spent some time together a few weeks back at their big analyst event. So he's kind of one of the best practitioners at the me, myself, and I model of analyst relations that you see at a lot of mid-sized software companies. So he's too modest, so I'll give him the props.
Thanks,
and before I pass it off to Crystal for the opening question, correct me if I'm wrong, but based on LinkedIn stalking, you look after both analyst and influencer relations at LogicMonitor. Is that correct?
It's blending, right? It's blurring. I think that's happening for a lot of people. I think that my practice has included traditional analysts, and it's kind of blurring into more and more influencers. So we haven't quite defined the delineation yet, but yes, short answer is yes.
I was literally having that exact same conversation with Gabby Berkman from Dynatrace last night. Hello to Gabby for the name check, but I'm starting to see this happen a lot, Brandon, and I was talking about you and a couple of other people who are kind of leading the charge. What's an influencer? What's an analyst? Some people sit between those two. Some analysts operate like influencers occasionally, but they are analysts as well, vice versa. So I think we can get, and we've had this conversation, Crystal, around kind of it being a somewhat polarizing term for some analysts when you say influencer. But I think, certainly if you've got 50,000 followers on LinkedIn and X, you've probably got the same stats as an influencer. So are you influencing via social channels whilst being an analyst? Those lines are absolutely blurring for me.
No, they absolutely are. And I think let's park that to one side for a second, because Brandon, I'd love to dig into that a little bit. But this pairs really nicely with Crystal's opening question, which, Crystal, do you want to take it away?
I would be happy to. Although I can't wait to continue talking about the blurred lines. It's hard to contain yourself, right?
I know.
So, Brandon, I love that you started off saying, don't hate me because I spent this time sort of out in the broader ecosystem at Gartner. And there are a lot of people that go from Gartner to the AR sort of world. And one thing is always true, that there is a very small percentage of people that says, I want to be an AR pro, or I want to be, well, maybe some people do say I want to be a technology analyst, but it definitely seems like a lot of us, well, you didn't grow
There's
up
some crazy people out there, Crystal, who choose
you weren't like a 5-year-old thinking like, this is, like, we don't grow up thinking like analyst relations. Speaking of 5-year-old, I may have a guess.
Stephen was a 5-year-old that was absolutely reading the faxes from Gartner. Just page after page after page.
Was it those ones with the holes that came through, like the holes on the side that like kept printing through?
Oh wow,
Matrix printers back in the day.
Right.
I'm aging myself now.
So all of this chatter, this is going to be the funnest chat, I think. But all of this chatter is, where do you think analyst relations and who was the first AR person? You have any guesses as to how this whole thing started that gets to be this lovely community that we enjoy?
Well, I'll tell you, I think they must have been a glutton for punishment, because it's AR can be fun, it can be tricky, it can be frustrating, it can be all the things. So I don't know what I know that there's stories out there, and different people have told me different folks have kind of kicked it off, but it's kind of like a chicken and the egg. Was the analyst first or was the technology first? It's interesting. It's like As long as there's been technology, there's been folks out there advising people on it, whether it was traditional or not, non-traditional in these analyst firms. But I think it just kind of evolved over time, right? So, you had these folks in probably the influencers of their time, whether they were doing that in print media or however they were doing it in those days. But I think, as people formalize their positions and, their understanding of the technology, people just naturally went to them for advice. And whenever you're going to someone for advice, you want them to talk about you. So, thus AR was born. That's my theory anyway. I know that there's official stories out there, but that's, I think just generally that's how it happened.
I think there's probably a lot in that, Brandon, that it is a defined profession with job titles now. I think if you were to go back to the early days, it'd be interesting, and I've had this discussion, analysts are kind of held in an elevated position in our community. But if you look at sort of an analyst in banking, it's often a junior entry-level roles. I may be interested in where did the word analyst come from? Because I mean, I don't mind about job titles. I'm not saying I need a cooler job title. It doesn't matter. That's what we're called in the industry. But it is interesting. You explain to people who aren't in our industry that I'm an analyst, and they kind of go, "Oh, you got a junior role in tech," and you could be a data analyst for a sort of. So it's not even just outside of technology. You could be a data analyst working for somebody. So it'd be interesting to understand where the term came from as analyst.
Yeah, I'm loving this forensics of our industry. It's really interesting if you like that kind of thing.
It's funny because we ran into that at the event that you were at, Stephen, our Elevate community event. We had a drop down of what type of attendee were you, and obviously analyst was one of them. And I didn't want to inflate my numbers because I think there was like 13 analysts there, and I had to go back and forth with the events team on the reporting to say, hey, look, this was an industry analyst versus someone who had analyst in their title. So it's definitely confusing, especially for people that aren't in the AR industry.
Yeah, you've got equities analysts, obviously on the sort of equities and investor relations side, and that's a relatively elevated title. But and then is it industry analyst? Is it technology analyst? I hear those used interchangeably. So I don't know, maybe Crystal, that's something we can go down the rabbit hole and find out over time.
And then if you throw in advisors and consultants in the mix, it gets even hairier, right? I want to pull on, just to get out of those weeds a little bit, Brandon. I really like that you talk about the evolution of our origin stories, because if we take a view at where we are today, to pull on that initial thread that we were getting off into a tangent before our kickoff, right, is with the blurring of lines, we are absolutely in an evolutionary point. Like, I've been around for 14 years. I stumbled into this world like, wait, what? I don't even know that this is a thing. It feels very very secret society-ish when I first came in. Right? So
we need to develop a specific handshake that we use at analyst events.
Like the pitchers and catchers and such in baseball. So, I'll promise I will stop talking here in a second. But when I think about the first 7 years of my journey, so first half, it was very different than, I think a good change point was like during COVID. And then as we were coming out of COVID, a lot more talk about impact, value, key learnings, analyst relations as a partnership. So I'd love to pull on sort of some of your philosophies in this transition and how you're approaching it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I see a lot of folks, like, and myself included for a little while, taking analyst relations out of their headlines on LinkedIn. And there's always been this kind of back and forth right now about what is going to be the analyst relations title in a few years. Is it market insight strategist? Is it influencer relations? Is it, I have on mind the lead practitioner at LogicMonitor. So it's interesting to see the evolution. It's almost like people are, thinking about analyst relations in a different way in this evolution that, you were describing, moving these folks into, more of a partnership and bringing insights back into the organization. I think that's kind of my core philosophy is, everything's built on partnership. And going back to my time at Gartner is where I kind of developed that philosophy, and why I wanted to get into analyst relations full time is because I saw that the vendors that really focused in on having meaningful conversations with the analysts were the ones that were getting the most traction. Because, in the background at Gartner, whenever I was there, we were chatting with the analysts during briefings and going back and forth. And you hear a lot from the analyst perspective about how these vendors kind of talk, and, the different partnership levels and that sort of thing. But I think, as I've moved into analyst relations full time, and over the years, I really focus in on partnerships. Crystal, you've seen my event, and you guys have both seen the model that I use. But I think that partnerships are at the core of analyst relations. And to establish good partnerships, you have to have meaningful engagements. And to have meaningful engagements, you have to have trust. So I think it all starts with trust, and establishing that trust up front, showing that you're interested in learning, the individual's point of view, and that they're interested in learning yours, and that whether you agree with it or not, or whether they agree with you or not, it's the foundation of a relationship, right? It's compromise. It's getting to know each other. It's, finding those opportunities to build on the other person's, point of view.
That's so important, Brandon. This is not necessarily a new concept. We've heard it bandied around, whether you're at, something like a Spotlight Analyst Relations Summit or just scrolling LinkedIn, but it bears repeating. The relationship component of this role, the fact that you need to not see analysts as a means to an end, but rather as a strategic partner to engage over time. Like, these are fundamental concepts in the industry, and they will not change regardless of the technology that changes around it, whether that be, chatbots, LLM, whatever it may be. That is going to remain. The single most important thing we can do as analyst relations practitioners is focus on the relational component, in my opinion.
I think the thing I would say, and Brandon, I know we've spoken about this, and it seems to be a continual theme. I think there is different types of analysts, and they perform different types of functions, and then there's a few analysts that operate in all of those realms. There's people who have Forbes columns, there's people who are on the TV, there's people who've got big social followings, there's people who can drive a press and investor relations kind of narrative for you, and they can also be an analyst. So I think the way I look at it is, when I'm chatting to people like Brandon about a partnership and he drives those really strategically, I'm not thinking, oh, well, I'm in this swim lane. I'm thinking just, how can I help? What do you need? How, whether that's, hey, I'm going to be doing a TV hit and I could, can you get me some talking points so that I can be better informed about LogicMonitor? Or whether it's advisory to their leadership team that's behind a closed door. I don't tend to worry about describing myself in too tight a box. It's really around the partnership you can have with the vendor. Different ways to collaborate, and that's how I look at it, at least.
If I could put a little bit of my AR Insights hat on, I think that that's sort of like what the data has told us as a company, right? And what I think our clients and the analysts are telling us, right? Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can strategically align, and sometimes you're stronger in one area, in one coverage, and then other areas, right? Like you're like a mainframe guy, right? But because everything in technology is interwoven, right? You can't ignore AI, you can't ignore cyber, right? Like, you can provide insight or amplify or helps, push on the end user buyer that you have in your circle and an advisory side of things. So it really is like a tool set. And I think Dan O'Brien had talked about this, right? Is think about the tools and use them accordingly. And that could change with every relationship.
Yeah. And this, really quickly, something I'd love for Brandon to pick up and run with is, a good analyst relations program uses all of those different avenues. One of the biggest challenges is sometimes convincing executives or stakeholders that Gartner's version of influence is not the only influence. So, Brandon, obviously, you're speaking about the user event or the analyst event you just hosted. Clearly, this is a conversation
by the way. Great event. Well done.
Clearly, this is a conversation you've had and won. So, how have you, within your program, within your organization, kind of had that conversation and shown the place that every different kind of analyst has within your ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's evolved over time, right? It takes time to convince someone that there's more to an analyst than just being, a megaphone or an advertiser. I always say that analysts want to advise, not advertise. So it takes it takes a while to build up that internal trust. Just like you're building trust with the folks externally, you're building trust internally, and I think it takes time. And I think there's a few different ways that I think about it. I think that those different types of analysts in different types of situations, and it's always so difficult to tier analysts. I find that like concept difficult from a tiering perspective. Everybody has a different way of doing it. I've kind of shifted my perspective on it, but I think that every analyst has value, to Steven's point, in different ways, or every expert has a different type of value depending on the strategic KPI that you're working against. So I think it's putting folks in front of these analysts in a different kind of way, just asking for that initial trust that, hey, listen, here's the KPI that we're working against. I think that this analyst can have impact, from a end user perspective, bringing those insights into the organization so that it's expanding our view of, how end users are thinking about our platform or other platforms. Is then engaging with, analysts and experts that are more go-to-market, like, taking those end user insights and then applying them to how we're developing and evolving our go-to-market message. And then there's folks that, that can really amplify that message that you partner with and validate, and, that can get that message out to market. So I think it's like, it's interesting, and, different KPIs require different levels. Like, some may just need that end user insight. Others need that amplification piece. So it's interesting. And, I really appreciate AR Insights, the way that you guys have evolved your top 100. I've had a lot of conversations with Crystal and with the team over at AR Insights about this. And I appreciate the fact that they've evolved that to not only be specific to an organization, but also that it brings those different types of measurement points in terms of where the analysts or where the experts have significant value or significant engagement and influence. So that when I'm going through a KPI and I'm thinking through who's the top 10 analysts or who's the top 10 experts that I want to engage with on this specific KPI. I'm starting to start there and then trying to apply that, through AI to give me the best approach for a specific KPI, whether that's, hey, listen, we're trying to get market validation, or, we need to get more, awareness, or, hey, listen, there's a, piece of the product roadmap that we're trying to influence and we're not really sure where to take it. There's different folks that have different value, and you can't count anyone out of that conversation. Like, you really have to take a step back and look into where the individuals can have value, and also like the relationship that you have with those folks. I think in order to get to the real value of these relationships, you have to be focused on developing those partnerships, because someone that you consider like a true partner can really help you bounce ideas off of them that you can go to in confidential conversations, that you can work with them to, influence the market or influence specific end users or buyers and that sort of thing. So I think it kind of all comes back to that, identifying, the level of partnership that you have with an individual expert, and then applying that to the individual KPIs based on your experience with them and based on what the experts want to do with you. I try to always ask them, hey, listen, what do you want to get out of this relationship? And try to help them. In some cases it could be, they want to grow their own influence. And it's like, okay, how can we partner with this? How can we, get you the information that you're looking for from LogicMonitor or from any company that I'm working from, and apply that to your specific situation? And how can we help each other? It's interesting. I say at the top of this, I kind of, mentioned kind of a negative connotation toward my time at Gartner. But one of the things I picked up there, and one of the things that they train you on, is trust-based value-add relationships. And everybody has a different relationship with the folks that they work with over there. But that was the thing that really resonated with me the most when I started working there. And it just, I think it's something that people sometimes can forget, that you have to build those relationships first and then try to get value. So yeah, hopefully I didn't ramble there, but yeah. That's
to pull on, no, that was fantastic. To pull on that Gartner thread, Gartner is obviously mostly thought of in terms of end user influence, but I would say everything you just talked about, different analysts having a different place to play within an organization, that's something Gartner realizes. Not every Gartner analyst is created equal, right? You have some of the distinguished VP analysts that are very much thought leaders and out on the speaking circuit, but then you have more advisory type analysts who actually are just sitting down and partnering with the business. And again, there's a lot we could dig into with Gartner. Is that the right move, etc.? but that is something they recognize fully.
I had this conversation for about an hour with Mike Diamond last night, who's running the Ingram Micro Analyst Relations program. And we were talking about how he's scaling up and building that program. And literally, we had the conversation that Brandon's was talking about. I come from an independent, so you would think I would over advocate for independence, but I don't. I advocate for you've got to have a balanced program. You've got to have Gartner, you've got to have IDC, you've got to have Forrester, you've got to be thinking about Omdia and some of the other big guys. Then you want a small group of independents that you work with. Then you want to find the one person who works for a tiny firm or is a super expert and who knows everything about your particular platform down to the feature function, kind of super granular level. And then you want to just mix and match that based exactly on what Brandon's saying, which is, what am I looking to achieve with this particular engagement? Because it might be you want to put a product manager who wants to understand, in Brandon's case, specifically what is Dynatrace and kind of these guys doing that exactly compares against the LogicMonitor at a feature function. Well, I was at the LogicMonitor briefing and I was literally chatting with Gabby from Dynatrace last night, but I don't operate at that level. So it's not going to be me. It's not going to be Daniel Newman who can help you get onto the tier one media. It might not be the Gartner, but you're going to need to come at it. What's the specific thing you want to achieve?
Right.
And go into that KPI point.
It's why I don't like the question that often gets asked in the analyst relations world of, is X firm or X analyst worth engaging with? Because that is too simplistic of a view. It's entirely dependent upon the context of what you want to achieve. If part of your goal as an organization is to provide third-party market validation, you can't scoff at the opportunity to do that if it's not a Gartner. Like, a lot of people think only the big three can give you validation in the market. That is not true. Not true at all.
And Gartner plays such an important role, right? If Gartner didn't exist and create this really powerful lane, none of us would be sitting here. I just want to do a little Gartner love too, because they're not here to bash anything.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you want customer insight, if you want to go and crowdsource 100 CIOs feedback on an AI, there is nobody better. I would argue the only people who do customer feedback at scale effectively are gone. So if your KPI is, I want to go and get a pulse on what 100 customers are thinking on this one topic, there's no other firm I would call.
Agreed.
So to that, Brandon, you said something and I put it in the chat, like, let's pull on that strategic KPI string, because in all of my meetings, I hear from analysts and from AR people is, how do we illustrate value, right? And I think with that one thing that you shared is the strategic alignment with the right people based off of your company's goals. You are like slaying all the things that you need to, building trust with your executive team or stakeholders, building trust with your analyst, and helping yourself expand your mandates and drive value. So let's talk about that a little bit more, because I don't think people really understand that you are literally aligning what are we trying to do in these things as a company and then supporting it. So
to build on that, maybe double click too into the relationships you have forged internally. Who is on your Tiger team? Who are your key stakeholders? Like, were these relationships that were provided to you, or did you have to make them yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because let me start with thinking about the KPIs. And I was posting about this recently on LinkedIn. And it's evolving, right? Like every year it shifts. Every year the company goals shift. Every year the messaging shifts. So it's like you have to really think about realigning analyst relations, and you can't always think about it like, oh, okay, this year's awareness, is it the same thing going into last year? And that's the thing that makes it really difficult to measure too, is like a lot of folks compare year over year performance. And it's like, well, last year we were focused on a completely different completely different KPI than we're focused on this year. I think it's like that's one of the things that people think about is AR can't be measured in quarters. It's measured in years, like in terms of its value. It's like over the last 3 years, this is what we've accomplished. We've generated awareness. We've, built partnerships. We've, gotten validation. We've gotten folks, to engage with our brand more often. It's those things that I think are really valuable. And I think it's through that internally we've forged relationships and partnerships. It's interesting because, folks come and go, right? So you're always constantly building new relationships internally. And when I think about the sales aspect, I think when you're selling the value of AR, you do more sales internally than you do externally. Like, you're talking about your company a lot to the industry experts and the folks that you're trying to build relationships with, but it's more so internally. And, I don't have it all figured out. I'm not always the best person that has done this, but I think it's like, through engagement, which is the core of relationships, people, become advocates. And, we've had folks that advocate us from the product side, the chief product officer that was recently with us and, working to build a relationship with our new chief product officer. And I think one of the folks that I'm very excited about that is very interested in AR is our CEO. It's like the gold standard of trying to get folks engaged with the program. And since I started at LogicMonitor, Christina's been very engaged in the program and wants to speak to these folks and, wants to engage and wants feedback. And that's not something that's, common. And it takes time to build other relationships, but it's always great when you inherit a relationship like that for sure, because you can build off of that. The other, I think, challenge to it when you think about it is everybody comes into, especially in B2B software, hardware, that's, our niche. Everybody comes into a company with a different perspective on what analyst relations is. So, you're always kind of learning new perspectives from different people, and you're always kind of adjusting your approach to the individual. So I think that's really important is
teaching as well, right?
What's that?
Teaching. I hear that a lot from AR pros is it's a constant education of the tools that are available and how to do it, how to execute, what to expect. Yeah.
I think that's not acknowledged, and we'll talk about the event that I went to that Brandon hosted. You're building relationships in very rarefied air. You heard Brandon there. We had a magic hour-long lunch at this event that we've been talking about since. The CEOs there, the CROs there, the chief product officers there. There was, what was it, Brandon, 6 or 7 of your leadership team?
Yeah.
With a handful of analysts. Brandon's building relationships with the most senior person in the company, people in the company. So, I don't know what level of tier of person you are, Brandon, within LogicMonitor's kind of HR system.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not, and I had this conversation with Sophie Kwan at Cisco this week. Just think of the rooms that you're in and the conversations that you're having. Sophie is absolutely somebody we need to get on the show because she's kind of 3 or 4 years out of college. And I was having this conversation with her about career progression. And it's kind of, you're in a room with your CEO and 90,000 people work for Cisco. How many people have actually met Chuck Robbins who work for Cisco? It's a handful of people. And Sophie's, what is she, 26, something like that? And she's in a room listening to...
Is phenomenal.
She's phenomenal. But we have to have her on to talk about the sort of early
just
but
because
building relationships happens in rarefied air, and that's not talked about enough.
Well, this is potentially a segue kind of into where we go towards the end of the conversation too, which is this is all about promoting community, and the spirit of that. Kevin Lucas at Forrester just published a piece of research kind of on this very topic, which is that analyst relations can be a pathway to senior level positions at a vendor. I mean, Chris Manfredi and I were talking about this morning, actually. I have the title of manager, right? Most analyst relations folks have the title of manager. It's so much more than that because you do have access, and not only access, you have a responsibility to some of the senior most people within a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're lucky enough to have that buy-in and that engagement too, it's phenomenal. Stephen's point, having a seat at the table and getting to be in these rooms and engage with these folks that, most people in the organization will never talk to is really amazing. And I've always thought,
but you're also tasked with, there's a lot of responsibility on you in that room. So it's not just you're an observer sitting at the back taking notes. You've curated the conversation, you're following up, you're doing the actions. You're an integral part of a ridiculously senior conversation. It's not some passenger sitting in the back, carrying a bag for somebody. You're actually driving the conversation.
The glue and the bumpers, right?
Yeah.
At the same time.
Right.
I like that.
That's definitely the goal of these internal relationships, is to be that person. And I think sometimes it's a little difficult because, you don't earn that immediately. What I found is it takes time to get to that point, and it takes a certain level of program to get to that point, because I think as AR people, we can all agree that you have to balance strategy and tactics. You're the strategic lead of a function, plus you're the person scheduling engagements on the calendars. It's you have to balance that. And the thing that's cool about it is not only do you have a seat at the table, you're not only your conversations with these executives, these senior leadership, but you get to access to all this deep and rich data about the market. You can really become an expert in anything. I always tell people going into analyst relations, they're like, what's the value of being an AR person? It seems niche. It seems like there's limited growth. It's like, it's actually unlimited. To you guys' point, it's thinking about senior leadership. It's moving into product, or it's moving into product marketing, or it's moving into sales, or it's, moving into strategy, which I'm really thankful and grateful that I've been moved over to the strategy team within LogicMonitor. So the function has become more of a company level function versus
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I mean, analyst relations is one of the few roles within the company that has a purview over everything, right? If you are the point person running a product, your view becomes very myopically focused on that product in that context. There's only a handful of people within an organization, strategy being one of them, the CEO being another, the C-suite being the other, that have that holistic view of what does this mean for that part of the company? What does this particular kind of go-to-market motion do across the chain of the industry, so to speak?
Very few people in an organization who are chatting to the CFO, the chief product officer, the CEO, the CRO. There's very few people who chat to all those people and who have relationships with all those people. Really, really small group of people have got that broader relationship footprint, and AR's one of them. So if you then want to go and, hey, you get into this, you do it for a few years, and you want to go in to be a product manager, you're going to know the chief product officer. If you want to go into finance because you're doing an MBA and you're going to know the CFO. You're going to know the head of marketing if you want to get into marketing. You're going to know all those people because they're part of your program and they're in these rooms. So there's very, very few people that have that level of relationship footprint at the most senior level in an organization, I think.
Because I was going to say, because we're kind of already on the topic of the future.
Yep.
Brandon, one of the ways we end every episode is with a look towards the future, whether that be 12 months, 18 months, 5 years. Where do you think this profession is going? Is it going to result in the first ever chief analyst relations officer? What is the future for AR?
That's a really good question. And I've written some pieces on that, and my recent posts think about that, kind of the implications of AI and still focusing on relationships. I think it's going to continue to become more strategic. And I think that some people are a little fearful of AI, or they don't quite understand it, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity for AR people to focus on strategy, because it takes away that tactical piece, or at least it enables you to do quicker tactical work, and you're enabled to focus on what matters. You're focused on the relationships, you're focused on the engagement, you're focused on bringing insights back into the organization. So I completely agree. I think that there's lots of VP of analyst relations out there. I don't see why there couldn't be a chief market engagement officer, beyond, like someone that, could report into the CEO or something along those lines. I think the future is bright for anyone in analyst relations or people that want to get into analyst relations. I think the interesting thing is going to be how we evolve, and how the analyst firms evolve, and how these experts evolve, and how these major evaluations evolve. That's going to be the interesting piece. And one day maybe, are we AI influencers, or are we AI engagement, or how are we going to think about that in the future? I was having a great conversation with one of my colleagues, or somebody that I have a lot of respect for, Tricia Batskova. Sorry, Tricia, if I'm murdering your last name. But it's like, what's the future for AR folks in a world of AI when information is becoming democratized? And I think it goes back to partnership and relationship and engagement, because nothing beats a face-to-face, one-on-one, deep conversation about where things are heading. And I think that the future of AR is going to be more focused in on partnership and engagement than it is on tactical execution.
Yeah, and that's a thread that actually, by the time you listen to this, will be a little bit old, but you can go find it. Carter Lusher had a post about synthetic versus, I think,
Right.
first party data. And there was a lively discussion in the comments. Adam Holtby and John Collins made a great point. Adam Holtby from Omdia, John Collins from GigaOM. A
We
lot of these things.
a better job of like, I wish we could have a counter of name drops.
This is the name drop
Let's put it in the corner.
episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
We need to tag everybody when we post, Crystal.
right. It actually goes, it proves the point that this is a thriving and valuable community.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we are not the owners of the great insights. We are evolving them with our cohorts, with the people that inspire us to think differently. So how about that? Well, I'm gonna figure out how to get a name drop counter on this thing.
If you watch Welcome to Wrexham, every time the Wrexham boss, the manager, drops the F-bomb, there's a Phil
Counter.
I love that. I love
enthusiasm
that.
counter. Yeah.
Yes.
Hilarious.
All I was going to say is Adam and John both kind of talked about this in that a lot of these things will become table stakes, the
Mhm.
democratization of knowledge. It is all about the difference that we can add on top of that. The what it means, I think, is going to become so important. So that's all to say, no one is doing all these things today. And Brandon, I'd love to kind of end there. If you're listening to this and you're discouraged because you haven't even necessarily figured out how to use AI in your day to day, don't be worried. Like, I don't think there's a single AR practitioner out there who has freed themselves up completely to focus solely on strategy. What do you think about that?
Totally. I couldn't agree more because we're still in the weeds when it comes to figuring out a way to automate engagement. I think agentic AI is going to be really interesting as that starts to come up,
Yeah.
but no one's got it figured out. And it's so funny about people are like, I use AI every day, personal life, work life. I just kind of dived into it. And I think if you're going into it and you haven't figured it out, just ask the AI how it can help you. And that's how I've learned it. I'm like, hey, here's everything that you need to know about my program. What am I missing? Where are my blind spots? How would you think about this analyst? Who should I be engaging with? Just ask AI and it can help you. I think that's
take my transcripts for my calls and ask how I could be more consultative, how I could be more clear.
That's great.
And I do that for the week. Right? My team actually does it as well. It's like, how are we engaging with our base and how could we do better? And that is like a net new thing. And it actually was really great. Like, hey, you missed this question and it could have helped you, whatever. And I was like, oh, that's a great question to ask. So yeah.
What a fantastic way to end our conversation together. Nobody has figured it out, but we're figuring it out together to pull on Brandon and Crystal's threads. So Brandon, you have been a terrific guest.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending time with us this morning. You've been listening to episode 11 of AR Chat. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.